As we engage in this debate, let's remember, we really only have three options for dealing with Iran's nuclear program. Bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, which will only set its program back a few years while starting another war in the Middle East. Abandoning negotiations and hoping for the best with sanctions, even though that's always led to Iran making more progress in its nuclear program. Or a robust and verifiable deal like this one that peacefully prevents Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
Our guest represents Wisconsin's 8th Congressional District and a member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs. Let's welcome back Congressman Reid Ribble to MidPoint. Congressman, thanks for being here.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Ed.
Let me get right to it here when it comes down to this deal, President Obama and the Iranian nuclear chances here. Does the president need congressional oversight because he is naive, foolish, or reckless? It's got to be one of them.
Well, I mean, you're only giving him three choices there. He needs congressional oversight because the Constitution requires it. And so the Senate plays a role to advise and consent under Article 2, and that's exactly what should happen.
But there is a feeling in the American public, on the criticism side, who would say that other presidents don't get this kind of scrutiny from Congress, even though you're right, constitutionally correct. They will say that the only reason is because it's President Obama, and this right Congress wants to make sure that they have a decision in everything. Of course, they forget that it was a 19-0 decision to go ahead with the extra work.
Well, yeah, of course, and I think it's always the idea that we should reinvent history or reshape history. The dynamic of this Congress is different than every other Congress that's been there because the people that are here are different people. The circumstances are different. The threats are different. And so the Congress reacts differently. And today is different than 1960, 1930, or 1880. And so each Congress is going to adapt to the global world that they live in. And this is just a circumstance that we face.
Is he, though? And I guess I still need to get an answer on that because certainly a lot of people have talked about it. The president needing this. Some people say that he is just dangerously reckless at this point, and you've got to have in the minds of some adults in the room who have to bring him into line with what Iran really is.
Well, the president said yesterday he would accept the Senate's action to have say in this deal, and I think it was a wise move by the president because Senate Democrats in his own party are opposing the idea that the president should act unilaterally on behalf of the American people. The only time the American people have a say in these things is when their elected representatives weigh in for them. And so in this case, I think the president was forced by his own party to back away from this hard stance he had taken that he was going to work it alone.
Is this the beginning, perhaps, in your mind, Congressman, where the president may at least be forced to realize that he doesn't get his way at all times, that sometimes he has to bend, and that the Congress is a powerful body that he must listen to?
It is certainly the first time, I think, in his presidency that he's seen such a forceful pushback by the Congress in a united way, Republicans and Democrats, and particularly in the Senate. You have to remember, for the first 6 years that he was in office, Senator Harry Reid was pulling the strings over in the U.S. Senate, and he doesn't have that protection right now. And Mitch McConnell is a capable leader over there, and he's been able to pull this coalition of both parties to retake power that the Constitution has rightly given the Congress.
Are you confident that what the deal that you've struck now with the president over Iran and the nuclear deal is one that actually will make a difference? Because some who are on the president's side will say, this won't make any difference, this will still lead to the deal, it will still get done. And the president, meantime, apparently is, many people are behind the scenes telling Iran, don't worry, everything will still work out just fine.
Well, as you can imagine, in any negotiation, there's going to be a certain element of public pressure and public posturing. We're seeing it go on right now in Iran, and you're watching it in real time here in the United States. But I do think that this move by the Senate has brought a little bit of that advised portion into it already, and then the consent can follow if, in fact, the president follows the advice of the Congress, and we get a deal that is actually meaningful, that will not lead to the Iranians having the capability of having nuclear weapons. And I think that that's going to be, if any tension point, it's going to reside right there.
All right, I have a couple of other questions on this, but we're up against the clock, so I'd like you to please hold on just a minute. We're going to take a break. Congressman Reid Ribble will join us when we come back on the other side. There's still a question or two that needs to be asked here about Iran, plus we also need to talk about Cuba. Does the decision to move Cuba off the state sponsors of terrorism list bring the U.S. one step closer to lifting the embargo outright? Plus, there are still those who say this is all the wrong moves that we need to make at this time. We do not need to be treating Cuba in this fashion. We need to be even harder lined. Let's get some of the reality. We'll do that when we return right here on MidPoint. All right, let's get back to work with Wisconsin Republican Congressman Reid Ribble. Congressman, one last thing on Iran before we leave this behind. There is a feeling by some that Iran simply is outmaneuvering the United States at this point, that they are one step ahead of us and they are getting everything that they need. Does that just irk you when you hear that?
It doesn't irk me because I think there's in part some reality to it. I'm one of those that feel that the president's been out-negotiated on this, but he's not proven to be a particularly adept negotiator in his time in office. And every time the Iranians, they'll walk up to a deadline, and then they're able to move that deadline back. All the while, they continue to build their nuclear program. And so, sure, I think the concern is legitimate, quite frankly.
How worried does it make you when you hear Russia is moving then missiles into Iran, selling them missiles? These are missiles that, quite frankly, could go against Israel. And there are some believing that this might even be some sort of a proxy war, if you will. Russia creating a new Western front against Israel, the United States, and the rest of the West. This is a scary time right now.
It is. And this is the whole problem that members of Congress have with any lifting of sanctions or relaxing of sanctions, even though leaving some in, removing some off, is you open the door for this type of interference by the Russians. And let's face it, the Russians are pretty aggressive in how they've been acting throughout their region, and they're going to continue to be that way if we don't get a little bit tougher on the entire system going on in Iran, and the negotiators have to be a little bit better at what they're doing.
With regard to this Iran nuclear deal, do you believe, your opinion, that we will reach June, the time will come, the last date, and this deal will still not get done?
That's my gut feeling. Maybe they're able to come up with a deal that we can agree with. You certainly want some type of stop to the Iranian nuclear program, but in watching this throughout history now, the last several years, the Iranians have been pretty adept at going up to deadlines and then getting them extended.
Another nation that we're dealing with right now, Cuba, they will be removed from the U.S. list of nations that sponsor terrorism. On one side, people are saying, wait a minute, this is Cuba. Let's not forget what they have done in the past. Others are saying, our restrictions haven't worked over the last 40 or 50 years, so let's take a new tack. Where do you stand?
Yeah, I'm more on the second side on that. I think Cuba's an unnecessary distraction right now. I'm not exactly sure why the president decided that right now is the best time to be dealing with Cuba when you've got problems in Yemen, you got the Russians moving into Crimea and Ukraine, you've got all the Arab Spring that's unfolded in the last couple of years, you've got ISIS going on in Iraq and Syria. I mean, there's so much going on in the Middle East that we didn't need to add another foreign policy move here. But I don't know that it's the big disaster either way because it's such a small player, and particularly in this hemisphere. I will say this, that there's a better chance maybe for democracy to happen in Cuba the more the Cubans are interacting with American citizens. And so I wish it hadn't happened now, but we're here, and it's probably not as big a deal as some people are making.
Maybe best to say that when it comes down to the global stage, Cuba's more of a mosquito when you've got vultures elsewhere, probably in the Middle East as well?
Exactly, and you probably should have paid attention to the big issues rather than engaging in another small one.
All right, here comes a big issue, the budget. Of course, April 15th is a deadline for adopting the budget. Look, it's not going to get done. Everybody knows it's going to take time. Why? The American people are the ones, and Congressman, you probably hear it from your constituents all the time. Why can't the folks, the lawmakers in Washington, sit down, get this done, and you've got to miss another deadline for a budget?
Yeah, we're going to miss the deadline for sure because the deadline's today. I do believe we'll have a budget reconciliation between the House and Senate probably within the next week to 10 days. So it's definitely going to be late. I think the reason for it being late this time was just the unfortunate nature of having the Easter break happening so early in the year. So right after the House and Senate acted on their budgets, there was the break at Easter time, and the chairman needed to be there working it out. And so we pushed right up against the calendar, which is often the case here. But I can tell you in the last 4 decades, the House and Senate have not agreed on a budget and gotten their appropriations done on time even once in 4 decades. And so the American people have every right to be frustrated. But I will also say this in defense of it. It'll be the first time that we've had a reconciled budget since I've been in Congress, since 2011, and that's progress.
I've got about 45 seconds left. I need to ask your opinion on this. Now comes word that Darrell Issa, then the chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, had sent a letter to Mrs. Clinton 2 years ago to ask about this entire issue of basically sending out emails on personal servers. What do you think this will do to Mrs. Clinton now as she continues to run for president?
It's going to really be dependent on what else happens and how Mrs. Clinton chooses, or Secretary Clinton chooses to deal with this issue. The more she hides from it, the more suspicious people are going to get. And I believe that that deep middle vote, that independent voter in this country that really decides presidential elections, when it's all said and done, they're not going to like the fact that she's hiding something from them and not being transparent. We've just gone through what will have been 8 years of the least transparent government that I can remember, and having someone running for president who's hiding emails and emails that are owned by the taxpayer is problematic.
We will leave it at that. Congressman Reid Ribble, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
All right, take care. What is arguably the best day in the country, he said sarcastically, April 15th. The deadline to file your income tax with the IRS is here. MidPoint continues.